If you drive anywhere in the United States, February 2026 could quietly become one of the most expensive months of your life. Not because of a sudden spike in gas prices, and not because of rising car payments, but because a set of new driving laws is about to flip the rules of the road in a way most drivers still don't see coming. These changes weren't debated loudly on the floor of the House. They weren't rolled out with flashing warnings on the nightly news. Instead, they moved fast behind closed doors, and they were designed to do one thing extremely well: catch violations at scale. Starting right now, technology will be doing the watching, cloud-based systems will be doing the calculating, and the penalties won't be small. We are entering an era where 5 new rules will begin taking money directly out of drivers' pockets, often without a police officer ever pulling you over. We are talking about hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, and in some cases, compounding penalties that don't stop until you comply. What makes this moment dangerous isn't just the rules themselves, it's how suddenly they're being enforced and how unprepared most drivers are right now. By the time many people realize what changed, the fines will already be active, the notices already sent, and the damage already done. Months before this became public, the warning signs were there for anyone who knew where to look. Transportation analysts noticed something unusual happening in Washington. Meetings were taking place behind closed doors between federal agencies and technology companies. Enforcement budgets were being redirected toward departments that had been underfunded for years. Even more telling, the usual pushback from automotive and insurance lobbyists went silent. When transportation policy goes quiet at the federal level, it almost always means the decision has already been made. What made this moment stand out wasn't just that new driving laws were coming, it was how fast everything lined up at once. State DMVs began quietly adjusting their internal codes. Insurance companies updated their internal risk models. Law enforcement agencies started purchasing new monitoring technology before the public ever heard a word. This wasn't a gradual reform. This was preparation at a scale that only happens when enforcement is about to accelerate. The question was never whether new driving rules would arrive. The real question was how aggressive they would be, how much money they would extract, and whether drivers would realize what was happening before February 2026 made compliance non-optional. Early summer, the timeline finally became clear. February 2026 wasn't chosen at random. It was the moment federal systems would be fully synchronized, state enforcement agencies would be operationally ready, and automated monitoring networks would go live nationwide. This wasn't a soft rollout or a pilot program. Federal transportation officials described it internally as an activation phase. That language matters because activation means enforcement begins immediately, not after months of warnings. By today, every state is aligned with the same baseline standards, the same verification systems, and the same penalty structures. Once that switch flips, there is no grace period built in for confusion or ignorance. Officials have already confirmed that within weeks of this start date, active monitoring will begin across all 50 states. This isn't the occasional traffic stop most drivers are used to. This is continuous, technology-driven oversight, the kind that doesn't miss a lapse, doesn't forget a violation, and doesn't offer discretion. What makes this especially concerning is how few drivers are aware of what's coming. Recent surveys show that fewer than a quarter of licensed drivers can even identify one of these new rules correctly. That gap between enforcement readiness and public awareness is exactly where financial damage happens. For decades, traffic laws relied heavily on human intervention. An officer had to observe a violation, make a judgment call, and initiate a stop. That process naturally limited how many violations could be enforced. These new rules remove that limitation almost entirely. Enforcement is no longer bound by manpower or visibility, it's built into the infrastructure. Cameras, sensors, databases, and automated verification systems will now handle tasks that once required a human touch. This shift changes everything. A brief insurance lapse that might have gone unnoticed for days now triggers an automatic fine. Slowing down only when you see a camera no longer works when your average speed is being calculated over miles. A glance at a phone that once depended on an officer's observation can now be detected by fixed systems that never blink. This is why officials describe these changes as transformative. They're not just updating penalties, they're redefining how compliance is measured. And when compliance is measured continuously, violations become inevitable for anyone who isn't prepared. Experts estimate that unprepared drivers could face anywhere from $500 to well over $10,000 in penalties in the first year alone. Those figures are already written into the traffic codes. This is the point where driving in the United States shifts from casual compliance to constant accountability. First rule takes aim at something most drivers never think about, even though it's already inside their vehicle. Beginning now, Mandatory Event Data Recorder (EDR) compliance becomes a fully enforceable requirement. If your vehicle was manufactured after 2018, it is expected to have an EDR in verified working condition. This device is not optional, and it's no longer treated as background technology. It is now an inspection item. If the system is malfunctioning, disconnected, or shows signs of tampering, the penalty is immediate. The base fine starts at $750, and that's before any secondary consequences. What makes this rule especially powerful is how it connects enforcement agencies and insurance companies. EDRs capture precise information about how a vehicle was operating just before an incident, including speed, braking, and throttle input. Starting in February 2026, insurers are granted expanded access to this data during claims and investigations. Driving behavior is no longer a matter of interpretation, it's documented. Years, drivers assumed these systems existed mainly for crash analysis. Now they function as accountability infrastructure. They prove exactly how a vehicle was driven and remove ambiguity from fault determinations. For drivers who haven't checked whether their vehicle's system is functioning properly, this rule creates an invisible risk. You won't know there's a problem until an inspection, a claim, or a roadside check triggers it. Second rule is the one transportation officials expect to generate the highest volume of penalties in the shortest amount of time. Real-time insurance verification is now fully active nationwide. The familiar ritual of handing over an insurance card during a traffic stop is effectively obsolete. A national verification database now connects law enforcement systems, toll infrastructure, and automated license plate readers in real time. Every scan checks your coverage instantly. If your policy has lapsed, even for a single day, the system flags it automatically. There is no warning period. The first offense triggers a $1,000 fine. A second offense escalates to $2,500 and includes mandatory license suspension. What makes this rule especially dangerous is how common short lapses actually are. Missed payments, billing errors, or delays when switching providers are more frequent than most drivers realize. In the past, those gaps might have gone unnoticed. Now, the system is always checking. It doesn't care why the lapse happened. It only verifies whether coverage exists at that exact moment. Once a violation is recorded, reversing it becomes extremely difficult. Many drivers will get caught off guard, not because they chose to drive uninsured, but because they assumed a brief gap wouldn't matter. Third rule involves cell phone detection technology. These aren't just red light cameras with better lenses. There are advanced systems installed at major intersections and along busy corridors that analyze hand position, device placement, and screen illumination inside moving vehicles. They can tell the difference between a phone resting in a cup holder and a phone being actively used. They detect the posture associated with texting, scrolling, or holding a device near eye level. The first violation carries a $500 fine. The second jumps to $1,000 and includes a mandatory distracted driving course. The third triggers a 90-day license suspension. Many drivers don't consider quick glances to be violations, and many assume enforcement only happens when an officer witnesses it directly. That assumption no longer holds. These systems don't issue warnings, they issue notices. Once a violation is recorded, contesting it is difficult because the evidence is visual, time-stamped, and automatically logged. For drivers who rely on muscle memory more than intention, this rule alone could generate multiple penalties in a short period of time. It's not about whether you think you are being careful. It's about whether the system detected behavior it's programmed to flag. Fourth rule changes speed enforcement fundamentally. Speed enforcement is no longer about a single moment. Average speed monitoring zones are expanding across federal highways and major corridors. Instead of measuring how fast you were going at one point, cameras record your entry time and exit time between two locations. Your average speed across that entire stretch is calculated automatically. If it exceeds the limit, a violation is generated. Slowing down when you see a camera no longer protects you. The entire distance is monitored. This rule catches drivers who maintain speeds just slightly above the limit for extended periods, not just those who spike their speed briefly. Violations start at $300 and escalate to $800 when the average exceeds the limit by more than 15 miles per hour. This removes the gamesmanship drivers have learned over years of traditional speed traps. There's no guessing where the camera is. There's no timing a slowdown. The system only cares about the math. Because the calculation happens after the fact, drivers often don't realize they violated the rule until the notice arrives in the mail. For commuters traveling long distances, this quietly increases exposure to repeated fines. Fifth rule completes the picture with severe long-term financial consequences. Emissions compliance is no longer limited to scheduled inspection. New roadside emission sensors are operating passively, detecting non-compliant vehicles as they drive past without stopping. These systems analyze exhaust output in real time and compare it against federal standards. If a vehicle fails, a notice is mailed to the owner within 72 hours. The initial fine starts at $400. Once flagged, you enter a 30-day compliance window. Miss that deadline, and daily penalties of $50 begin accumulating. After 90 days, registration suspension becomes automatic. What makes this rule especially costly is that many drivers won't know they're out of compliance until the notice arrives. Older vehicles, modified exhaust systems, and deferred maintenance all increase risk. Repairs to bring a vehicle back into compliance can easily exceed $2,000. This turns what used to be an occasional inconvenience into an ongoing financial threat. The longer a driver delays action, the more expensive the situation becomes. This rule isn't designed to encourage compliance gently, it's designed to force it quickly. Not every driver absorbs these changes the same way. Analysts are clear that lower-income drivers, households with older vehicles, and people who rely on driving for work face the greatest risk. A newer car with factory-fresh systems is far less likely to trigger multiple violations. An older vehicle with aging sensors is far more exposed. The same is true for insurance. Drivers living paycheck to paycheck are more likely to experience short coverage gaps. Under the old system, those gaps might have gone unnoticed. Now they're instantly penalized. One violation often leads to another. An emissions issue leads to registration problems. A registration problem leads to higher insurance costs. Higher insurance costs increase the risk of coverage lapses. This cycle doesn't just punish noncompliance, it traps drivers financially. Critics argue these rules represent a shift in how driving privilege is enforced, using financial pressure as the primary tool. For drivers who are already stretched thin, preparation isn't optional. It's the difference between staying mobile and being priced off the road entirely. As these rules filter into state systems, the ripple effects are showing up. DMV wait times have jumped as drivers try to figure out if they are compliant. Insurance companies are adjusting risk models and raising premiums for drivers with any moving violations. Auto repair shops report a sharp rise in emissions testing and electronic diagnostics. This wasn't coincidence. It was a system reacting all at once. When enforcement, insurance, and compliance infrastructure move in sync, it signals intent. Federal authorities didn't just change the rules, they aligned every downstream consequence to reinforce them. This kind of coordinated pressure hasn't been seen since the early days of mandatory seat belt laws. Back then, many drivers resisted until fines made resistance too expensive. The same pattern is emerging again, only now the tools are more precise. What this moment really marks is the end of casual compliance. The assumption that enforcement would be inconsistent or that minor habits wouldn't matter. Federal standards now override state-level inconsistencies. Real-time verification replaces periodic checks. Passive monitoring supplements active enforcement. The system no longer waits for you to make a big mistake, it captures small ones repeatedly. Everything you believed about emissions, insurance, and technology is now outdated. The era of casual compliance is ending not because drivers became reckless, but because enforcement became constant. When enforcement is constant, preparation is the only defense. This isn't about fear, it's about reality. Driving in the United States is entering a new phase where accountability is built into the road itself. These rules arrive at a moment of serious financial strain for many households. Vehicle prices are high, repair costs are higher, and insurance premiums are climbing. For millions, a car is a necessity tied to work and family. When regulatory changes happen during economic pressure, they feel like reach to fragile budgets. A $400 fine is groceries. A $1,000 insurance violation is rent. Transportation officials may frame these rules in terms of safety, but drivers experience them in terms of cost. Under the old system, delaying a repair or stretching an insurance payment might have worked. Under this one, it doesn't. The system isn't designed to overlook hardship. It's designed to detect noncompliance. Consumer advocates are sounding alarms now because prevention is far cheaper than penalties. The message from federal agencies, once stripped of formal language, is blunt. Compliance is no longer optional, and patience is limited. Officials have stated plainly that ignoring these regulations is incompatible with responsible vehicle ownership. Historically, that tone only appears when agencies are confident in their tools, and they are. Enforcement budgets are in place, technology contracts are signed, and data systems are live. This isn't an experiment, it's a shift in posture. Billions of dollars in potential fines are now built into traffic codes. Those funds come from drivers. This moment feels different because it's about understanding how aggressively the law will now be applied. The system is unified, automated, and watching continuously. Advocacy groups warn that these 5 rules are structured to catch people who wait, busy, stressed drivers who assume they'll deal with it later. Later is when the penalties multiply. A missed repair turns into daily fines. A registration issue turns into insurance complications. Each step narrows options and raises costs. Professionals are urging drivers to act now, not after enforcement begins in earnest. Grace periods will be minimal, and appeals will be difficult because the evidence is digital. Rolling out all 5 rules simultaneously was a strategy. When multiple requirements change at once, it overwhelms complacency and forces behavior change quickly. This is aggressive compliance acceleration. Drivers who understand that strategy have an advantage. They can prepare calmly. Preparation means verifying continuous insurance coverage, checking EDR and emission systems, and understanding how monitoring zones work. These steps aren't dramatic, but they are protective. They shift you from being reactive to being informed. Informed drivers don't generate revenue for enforcement systems. Unprepared drivers do. February 2026 is a dividing line. On one side are drivers who adjust early. On the other are those who continue as usual until notices arrive. What happens next depends on awareness. Federal authorities, insurance companies, and households are all watching the results. Small decisions made now determine whether driving remains affordable. The system won't ask whether you knew. It will only check whether you complied. This is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a tighter enforcement era. Officials have signaled that this is only the first phase. As data comes in, enforcement priorities will be refined and expanded. Systems starting in cities will move outward. Thresholds can be lowered, and penalties can be increased. This is how modern regulation works. It arrives, measures, and adapts. Officials are watching whether awareness leads to compliance or whether penalties become the primary motivator. High compliance rates tend to stabilize a system, while widespread noncompliance tends to tighten it. The next 30 days are about more than avoiding fines. They're about shaping what enforcement looks like going forward. Households that prepare early reduce pressure, those that don't increase it. February 2026 marks the moment driving in the U.S. becomes inseparable from constant verification. Technology enables accountability, and automated enforcement produces financial consequences quickly. Drivers who verify compliance now will remember this as a close call they navigated. Those who ignore it may remember it as the moment driving became unexpectedly expensive. The difference isn't luck, it's awareness. The rules are written, the systems are live, and the penalties are defined. What remains undecided is how prepared you will be. Once the enforcement accelerates, there will be no ambiguity about what changed. The only question is whether you adjusted in time or whether you're learning these rules for the first time through a violation notice. Preparation separates those who stay in control from those who pay. And right now, preparation is still possible.